So I haven't done a new video in a while. I've been doing all of my recent updates through community posts on my community page, and what I've been looking at over the last week and a half or so have been things related to the Feast of Trees, because there are these really striking numerical connections, which I've gone over. If you look at the last two or three community posts, I explain all these really crazy numerical connections between Feast of Trees numbers, so numbers associated with trees in general, and also almond trees specifically, and also almonds, or watching, because almonds is related to watching because almonds look like eyes. So I've been looking at all of those number connections between numbers that having to do with those concepts to the symmetrical diagram that we've been looking at and that we've been constructing over time, and the quote-unquote Enochian calendar, because those numbers having to do with those concepts seem to pop up everywhere, and in even on dates that aren't connected to Tu B'Shavat. So something about this calendar that we're using and that diagram seems to just be telegraphing trees, trees, trees. So anyway, naturally we thought the rapture would be happening on the Feast of Trees. So first we looked at the Feast of Trees date, the Tu B'Shavat date on the new moon calendar, and that didn't, the rapture didn't happen then. And then we looked at the Tu B'Shavat date on the Enochian calendar, and that didn't pan out either. So, but I think, the striking telegraphing of trees by all the stuff we're looking at still is still there, obviously. So it has some meaning, and I'll go over later on how I think that meaning plays into what I think is potentially the correct rapture date. And another thing we've been looking at recently are the last few days in the Acts voyage timeline. And we were hoping that this journey on foot that Paul took from Puteoli to Rome, where he met brethren about 40 miles south of Rome at the Appii Forum, that meeting with the brethren would correspond to the rapture. But at this point, it's just been too long. I think it's like they departed Puteoli on February 25th, and it's March 6th as I make this video now. So that's like 11 days of walking, and we're getting, I don't know how fast they walked back in those times, but we're getting to the point where they would have to walk less than 10 miles a day, and that's really not that much distance to cover. So I think it's still technically possible that meeting corresponds to the rapture, but I think it's pretty unlikely. And I think we have better options, which I'll talk about in a moment, for what would potentially be the rapture date. And I think in retrospect also, it was probably futile to try to project that time forward from when they departed Puteoli for Rome, because they don't really tell you, obviously how long it took Paul to walk that distance. So everything would have just been guesswork. So that being said, I don't think that if that would have been the narrative element corresponding to the rapture, that meeting with the brethren, then obviously the Acts voyage is not designed, or the account of the Acts voyage is not designed to give you the exact rapture date, because you would have to be guessing. And so I would revert to my original conviction that the crossing of the Strait of Messina in the ship is the narrative element that symbolizes the actual rapture. I think that's clear in retrospect. And yeah, that happened back on February 17th. And the other thing, there are some good things about this. And by the way, I don't think that the timeline is out of alignment. And we have come across so many great numerical hints and confirmations that the timeline as we plotted it in the spreadsheet is perfectly in alignment with the current calendar. And another thing a great thing that came out of this study was the fact that that the entire timeline duration from the Day of Atonement to the day they depart Puteoli for Rome is this 119-day period, which is really amazing, because that number is so heavily telegraphed by the book of Acts in general, and by Acts 27 and 28. But overall, I no longer believe that the Acts voyage timeline was designed to give us the exact rapture date. I think it can get us to within the ballpark of the rapture, but not the exact date. or if it can, I don't really see how, at least not at the current time. I do think, though, that the Enochian calendar, quote unquote Enochian calendar, because it's not the calendar that's described in the Book of Enoch. That's a purely solar calendar in the Book of Enoch. I'm just calling it Enochian because it has it uses some of the it functions a little bit the same way as that calendar, but it doesn't have its start point is based on the moon position, so it can't be purely Enochian. So that's why I always say quote unquote Enochian calendar. But I think that Enochian calendar is a gift from God, and I think through that and through the diagram that we've created as a result of that, that one that pivots symmetrically around January 11th, which is Kislev 24. I think those tools, it may be possible to actually determine the actual rapture date from that. I think God gave us that for a reason, and I think that reason is so we can actually determine when the rapture would happen. And I'll go into that. So that's what we've been up to lately. So the other thing that I've been working on, and I think God has also revealed to me as a tool at the right time, is something called composite numbers. Now, we've talked a lot on this channel about prime numbers, and prime numbers, for anybody who doesn't know, but if you've been watching my channel for a while, it'd be pretty sad if you still don't know what prime numbers are, because you could just Google it. But prime numbers are basically like building block numbers. So a prime number is like it only has two factors, one and itself. Okay, so for instance, like 7 is a prime number. That's because you can't get 7 by multiplying any other number other than itself and 1. So you can only get 7 by multiplying 1 times 7, right? That's what makes 7 a prime number. That's probably not the technical definition, but this is like the simple definition, right? And same thing for like 13, right? So 13 is, you can't say like it's like 5 times something or 3 times something gives you 13. No, it's only going to be 1 and 13. That's what a prime number is. Okay, so there's a list of them. You can like Google prime number list, and yeah, I mean, right there you get the first 100. So you have 2, 3, 5, 7, 13. So those are all prime numbers. Okay, and so what is significant about only having 2 factors? Well, that means they're basically like the building blocks of all numbers, because all other numbers would be composed of prime numbers or multiples of prime numbers. So getting back to what I was saying. So like I've been looking into composite numbers. Now, what are composite numbers? Well, any number is going to be either a prime number or a composite number. So like 4 is a composite number because you see it's not on the list of prime numbers here. It goes from, the prime numbers go from 3 to 5 because 4 is not a prime number, because you can compose that you can compose that number from like other numbers. So you can, 4 is obviously 2 times 2. Okay, so that's what makes it a composite number. Right, so why do I bring up composite numbers? Well, like prime numbers, like we were always showing, something is like Zerubbabel equals in Gematria 241, which happens to be the 83rd prime. And you see that there's meaning there, right? Because 83 is in Gematria connected to Hanukkah and dedication. And Zerubbabel is also, conceptually related to that. Well, the same thing happens with composite numbers. So just like you would have like the 83rd prime number, you would have the 83rd composite number. Okay. Now, for example, like the 276 composite number is 345. And that's no accident, right? Now, 276 is connected to the 276 sign, which, as we saw, involves the 1st, 3rd, and 9th constellations. And that other number having to do, remember, with that sign is 329, right? Because it's like 3, 2, 9, right? The 3rd to the 9th constellation, or the 3rd hour to the 9th hour when Jesus was on the cross. on the cross. Now that's why 329 as a number is significantly associated with that 276 sign. Or 139 was a big one, right? 139 because the first, third, and ninth constellations. Now 345 is connected because if you look on a analog clock, you know, let's just pull this one up. If you look at an analog clock, if you're looking at third to the ninth hour, that's going to be like, if you put like one hand on the 3 and the other one pointing on the 9, what time is that? That's 3:45, right? That's why the number 345 is so connected to the 276 sign. And so as you can see, considering that the 276th composite number is 345, that composite numbers also have meaning, like there's meaning baked into it. That's just one of just a ton of examples. I couldn't find you can find a lot of online prime number calculators. Like if you want to look up like the nth number of prime and see what the value is, there are a lot of calculators online to do that. There are virtually none. Well, I can just say there are none for composite numbers. I actually had to write one myself in Java. So otherwise I would have to go look up like composite number, because they have the same thing like they have for prime numbers, composite number list. You know, and I would have to see, you have a list, right? But I would have to count them. So if I wanted to find the 101st composite number, I would have to go and count them all the time, right? And I didn't want to do that, so I wrote a program. And after writing that program, I just came up. It really just started pushing my research forward like by leaps and bounds, because the stuff I found in there not only confirmed a whole bunch of stuff, suspicions that I had, but also sort of opened new horizons. I guess I'll say it that way. So, all right. Now, what are those horizons? Let's see. Okay. Whoops. How did I get backwards there? So, one of the things that one of the things that composite numbers did was it confirmed this mirroring effect. Like we already have a lot of confirmations, but it's always nice to get more. So, if you look at the diagram here. So, by the way, we were talking about Feast of Trees, so we have added the Feast of Trees to this diagram. Actually, people watching this video right now probably have never seen this, because you've only seen the one that I drew in pencil. Well, in the meantime, I opened up MS Paint and created this. It's just a lot easier to look at, I think. And so, yeah, I guess I should talk about this real fast. Yeah, you have this amazing symmetry going on. Now, what is this? This is the this diagram that we've constructed over time as events have unfolded, that is a time period of 178 days. And that pivots around January 11th, which on the quote-unquote Enochian calendar is Kislev 24. And, okay, so why are we pivoting? What's so important about that date? Well, if you remember that date, Steve Fletcher and Daniel Taylor found that that's like this center point of a massive number of lunar and solar eclipses. It's just a huge celestial phenomenon, that date. And over time, if you watch my last, videos going back months, you'll know that our understanding has been evolving, so we got this great calendar from the Tabernacle of the Bridegroom channeled, which pegged January 11th as Kislev 24. And we know Kislev 24 is a massive date for the end times because of its the reference to it in Haggai chapter 2. I don't want to get too deep down into that because there's a lot of new stuff to talk about, but that's the origin of this thing, and it's sort of been developing over time. And as we've been adding new events to it, we found that it's creating this amazing symmetry, which is obviously by design. There's no way this is happening by chance. And you have events, either celestial events or let's just say abstract events, on either side of the pivot point. For instance, like the 276 sign is exactly mirrored with the completion of the temple dedication. And then you have this Heshvan 17 date on the Enochian calendar, Heshvan 17, that, which is the date of the start of the flood mentioned in Genesis 7:11, and that mirrors exactly to the Gregorian date of February 17th, right, which is the 17th day of the second month, the second Gregorian month. And then you get this partial lunar eclipse, which is mirrored to another partial lunar eclipse. No surprise there, because that was the center point of all the lunar eclipses and solar eclipses. But that first one here back in October, that maps to the Enochian Day of Atonement, which was the beginning of the Acts voyage timeline, which I have down here, where I overlaid the Acts 27-28 voyage timeline onto this timeline. And then you've got the wedding ring eclipse is perfectly mirrored. The wedding ring eclipse date of October 14th is perfectly mirrored with the Enochian New Year. So this whole thing is buttressed up against the end of the Enochian year. So what is all right, well, I guess I'll just show these amazing symmetries. So you've got this 37-day, this cascading interval of 37 days, right, heading going towards the center, and then you've got 74-day intervals popping up everywhere, and 74 in gematria is equal to Jesus. So that's Jesus popping up everywhere on this here. He's all over this diagram. And yeah, so that's that. And so recently we've added the Feast of Trees, which is Tu B'Shavat, which is Shavat 15, on the Enochian calendar, which corresponded to March 3rd. And that has a mirror date of November 20, which is 11/20, which is if you reduce that number, it's a 112, and that signals Genesis 1:12, and that's the verse in the creation account where trees are created. So that's a nice confirmation of this mirroring phenomenon. It's also the 214th day of the Enochian year, and as we've seen, you'll have to go back into my community post, but I explained how 214, that number 214, is also fundamentally numerically connected to trees. So that's all mirroring to the Feast of Trees date. Okay, now where do composite numbers come into play? Okay, so we have here, for some reason, the 276 sign is mirrored to the completion of the temple dedication that completed on January 26th going into the 27th. Now the 276 sign was the December 27th going into the 28th. So how are those connected? Well, let me open up my thing here. Okay, so the dates involved here, we're talking about December 27th and going into the 28th. So that's 1227. That's 1227, December 27th, and 1228. Okay, now those happen to be the 1026th and 1027th composite numbers. Okay, so and if you drop the 0 here, it's just a 126 and a 127. So you can see how that is confirming this mirroring going on here, because it's the 1227, December 27th going into the 28th, mirrored to January 26th going into the 27th, is perfectly matching this composite numbers, right, of the 1026th, 1027th composite numbers being 1227 and 1228. So that's just one of the things that have, one of the confirmations that has come out of the whole composite number research that I've been up to. But let's get into the new stuff. So if you remember, if you've watched any of my past videos, in this sort of learning phase where we've been slowly accumulating knowledge to the point where we can get to that really complicated symmetrical diagram, is this was one of the artifacts of that learning, And what we were doing here is we had on top the Gregorian timeline, right, starting at April 21st, and then the Enochian, quote unquote, calendar, right, on the bottom here, the timeline. The 1-1 here obviously represents Nisan 1. And we were noticing parallels in significant dates of, in using this Enochian calendar, particularly in the book of Haggai, okay? So we noticed that if you plot so there are 3 dates in the book of Haggai that the word of the Lord is given, okay? It's done on in Haggai 1:1, or and that's first day of the 6th month, and then Haggai 2:1, the word of the Lord comes again on 21st day of the 7th month, Tishri 21, and then in Haggai 2:10, the word of the Lord comes for the last time, and that's Kislev 24. And I don't know if I should mention this now. Well, I'll just put that. I'll just mention that later because it might be distracting. We noticed that those dates seem to line up with things in this Enochian Gregorian calendar, or on the Enochian calendar, I should say. It would line up to things, celestial events. So that first date, the Haggai 1:1 date of first day of the 6th month, happened to be exactly September 19th on the Gregorian calendar, which is the child asteroid Revelation 12 sign. And then Haggai 2:10, which is Kislev 24, happened to line up with January 11th, which was that massive eclipse midpoint. Where am I going with this? So the other one is Haggai 2:1, where it mentions the 21st day of the 7th month. Now that corresponds to the Gregorian date of 11/9, and nothing really happened celestially on that date, or really anything at all, even world event wise. Now it is interesting that it's a 119, and we've learned in past videos how important that number is. It's the pivotal number of the book of Acts. It's the binary door number, the binary door of 1110111. That's the binary number that conforms to the decimal 119. And that number we've seen is not only a binary door, because it's got the 0 in the middle representing a door, but it also is the binary door number that looks like a menorah, because you've got the 0 in the center, which is the door, which is Jesus Christ as the middle candle, and you've got your 111 on either side. Can make that more obvious if I just draw it out. 119 is equal to 1110111 in binary, right? So you got your menorah binary door. I've gone over that in the past. I'm not going to really get into that deeply here, but I just want to point out that's interesting. That was one interesting thing about that date, but that's not really enough, right? And another thing I noticed is that it seems to be a lot of other events seem to pivot around that date, or seem to be aligned to that date, I'll say. As other events would unfold, they seem to be happening on exact week numbers to that date. So, but other than that, it's really remained somewhat of a mystery. But what I thought recently was, well, what would happen if we on this diagram, because we have this phenomenon where you have this mirroring effect, what would happen if we plotted that date on this diagram, the date of November 9? Well, I went ahead and did that right here. And very interestingly, it's not in a random place. It's exactly symmetrical. It's exactly in the center between these 2 dates that were already there on both sides. So before there was just a 22-day span here, and now there's this November 9th date is like right in the middle of that. So there's 11 days on either side. I have to zoom in a little bit so you can see that. This is where I stuck in that date of the Haggai 2:1 date of November 9th. Tishri 21 is the Enochian date. Yeah. So, well, since all of these dates seem to have a corresponding mirror, well, what's the mirror of that? So it's 126 days later, you get to Shevat 26, which is 1126. So that by itself is pretty interesting. You have this numerical thing going on of 126 day span. So in other words, 1126 has a 126-day mirror span. I'll just say it like that on this diagram. So that's a nice little correspondence there, or hint that there's something's in alignment. Anyway, that date happens to be March 14th on this side, the mirror date, right? That's 314, which is pi, and we'll get into more of that later. And real fast before I move on, I'll just mention something else, because we were talking about composite numbers and how composite numbers confirm things for us. So with respect to this calendar, that date of Haggai 2:1, which Tishri 21, which lands on November 9th, which is 119. Now, that's the 203rd Enochian day of the year. Okay, the date of the Enochian calendar that began on April 21. This 11/9 date, November 9th, is the 203rd day. So one of the things that I learned by with my composite number program is that how that number comes into play here, because 203 is the 156th composite number, and then 156 is the 119th composite number. So it's not random that the 203rd day on this Enochian calendar happens to be this date signature of this date, which has a numerical signature of 119, which is just another piece of evidence to add to the mountain of evidence that this thing is not only aligned correctly, this Enochian calendar, but that this diagram is also by design. This is obviously divine in origin. Okay. So while we're talking about so that was the 203rd Enochian day of the year. What is Shevat 26? Well, that happens to be the 329th Enochian day of the year, which is huge. Okay, because we just saw, if you've seen my past videos, you'll know this already. But 329 is just hugely significant number, because it's one of the defining representative numbers of the 276 sign. Okay, along with 139, 329 and 139 I would say are the defining numbers, other than the 276 itself. Let's see what else about that date. Yeah, so it's the 329th Enochian day. So everything's sort of coming together now. It's like God showed me the 276 sign, which was huge, right? But it wasn't just this intended to be just this minor event that we would plot on a larger diagram. It's all connected. The Feast of Trees, the 276 sign, and I think it's all coming to a head on this date here, because that's the 329th day of the Enochian year. That is such a fundamental and powerful connection to the 276 sign, and everything's just really coming together. It really blows my mind, actually. Okay, so what else about that date? Let's see here. Another interesting thing is that, so like I said, that date of March 14th is 126 days from the 11/9 date that it's mirrored to. And that date of 11/9, like I said, is the 203rd day, Enochian day of the year. And one technique that God uses is something called, I call it digit incrementing or decrementing. And it's just like, if you imagine like those old analog alarm radio clocks where they had the numbers that would flip. If you just flip all the numbers up in any given number or down, you get a different number. So that's just a technique that God uses to hide things. So if you take the 203 and you do that number incrementing technique, which amounts to, mathematically, you just add 111. Well, what do you get? You get 314. So that's amazing too, that you have this number, that number 203, because it's the 203rd day of the year, and then its mirror date happens to be March 14th. So this diagram, this calendar alignment continues to every day just astonish me. It's obviously created by a vastly superior intelligence. I can I'm like a monkey poking at it and getting cool things coming out of it, but I can't really totally understand it. I can't totally wrap my head around how it functions at a fundamental deep level. I could just sort of find stuff and try to draw diagrams to illustrate what I see or what I understand, but that's really the extent of it. I can't really truly understand it. It's way deep. There's some kind of like really advanced math going on here. It's like the whole thing is like this like complicated mechanism. But anyway, so what else about that date? Okay, so 3/14, March 14th, is the 74th Gregorian day of the year. So the 74th day of 2024. And remember we've seen that 74 is all over this diagram, and 74 equals Jesus in Gematria. So that day you could say is like Jesus Day in a way, being the 74th day of the year. What else about that date? Well, I have to show you this, but it's 3/14, 2024, and if you do 3 plus 14 plus 224, because you always drop the zeros, 3 plus 14 plus 224 equals 241, which is Zerubbabel. And if you remember, 241 degrees was also on the 276 sign. It was the difference between the sun's position and the position of Jupiter, but on the taking the long way around the circle. So taking the quick way was 119 degrees, which is obviously already a hugely significant number related to the Book of Acts. The opposite way around the ecliptic was 241 degrees. But yeah, that's amazing. So that date is telegraphing 241. It's telegraphing Zerubbabel. And it's also, like I said, the 74th day of the year. So if you take 241, subtract 74, as in the 74th day, you get 167. What's that? 167 verses in the book of Esther. So that's telegraphing Esther. The other, I guess, one of the other narratives, biblical narratives that is topical at the moment, relevant to the rapture. All right. Okay, so now let's play a little bit with this number here. Let's try to do some reduction. So if you have 3/14, 224, that reduces to 358. Or 358. And let's see, what I want to show with this is, yeah, so first okay, so that's 358, and then the Enochian date, like I said, it was Shabbat 26, 11/26. Now if you take 11 times 26, you get 286. Okay, so we've got 358, that's the Gregorian date reduced, and then 286, that's the product of the Enochian date. Now it just happens to be the case that the 286th composite number is, you guessed it, 358. So there is a connection here, once again confirming the alignment that we have, of this Enochian calendar, quote unquote Enochian calendar, to the Gregorian calendar. Because there's just everywhere you look. If I made a video about all the stuff I found, it would take all day, today and tomorrow and the next day, because the biggest struggle I had with making these videos is like, okay, how do I pare the information down in a way that's not overwhelming, that's easily digested. Because there's every time I look at this thing, there's some numerical confirmation of the current alignment, or some kind of geometric confirmation, just the way it's laid out. Okay, so anyway, Now let's look at this. Let's continue to look at this. Now we have 314,224, okay, which is 314. If you want to play with the number a little bit, 314 plus 224. 314 plus 224, and you get 538, which happens to match the date signature of that date, how it's written in the rest of the world, the reduced version of that date signature, I should say. So that's 5, because that's the 1 4, that's the 1 plus 4, and then 3 for March, and then 224. And another thing I noticed was that another thing that God does is a lot of the stuff, to understand it, you have to understand like the numbers in the context of circles. Okay, so we already saw an example right there how Zerubbabel is connected to the number 119, because if you look at a circle of 360 degrees, so I'm going to do 360 degrees minus 241, which is Zerubbabel, you get 119. So 241 and 119 are what I call circle companion numbers. I just made up that term because they have that relationship in the context of a circle. And this works also not just with, it gets very complex. It works not just with a single circle, but it can be 1.5 circles, or it can be 2 circles, or it can be 4 circles. And that's what I'm talking about right now. So if you look at 4 circles, and 4 is also noteworthy because we're talking about the rapture, which involves a door, right? The door to heaven. And if you look at the Hebrew alphabet, the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is Dalet, which resembles a door. So that's the connection between 4 and door. And then in other things, you can look at like the menorah. The 4th candle is representing Jesus, and Jesus is the door. We've gone over all that stuff in the past. So that's why it's interesting that it's 4 circles, right? But anyway, so 4 circles is 360 times 4, right? Which happens to be 1440 degrees. Okay. Now, what is the companion number on 4 circles to 314? Right? Well, you just have to do 1440 minus 314. Well, it's 1126. Shabbat 26. Isn't that amazing? Let's see, what's next? Okay, so on the official Jewish calendar, let me just scroll down a little bit here. March 14th, is equal to, or is, Adar 2, 4. So the 4th day of Adar 2. Now we can represent that numerically as the 4th day of the 13th month. So we would represent it as 134. And that's interesting because it's also, well, I see 430. It's the reverse of 431 a lot. Excuse me, it's the reverse of 431, and I see that number 431 a lot in the context of referring to John chapter 10, which is the chapter where Jesus is at Hanukkah, basically, because John is the 43rd. It's the reverse of 431, and John is the 43rd book, and 10 reduced just becomes 1. So anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but anyway, what's significant about 134? Well, 134 is the 101st composite number, and that's another one of our that also points to rapture, right? Because that's like the binary door number of 5, right? Because 5 in decimal equals 101. But this one you don't even need to know about binary because it's right there in your face. It's 101. So you got the wall on either side, and the 0 is the door in the middle. So interesting that that date happens to be the if this were the rapture date, that the official Jewish date is telegraphing a 101, right? Other interesting things about 101 is like you have this debate online about whether the word in 2 Thessalonians, I think chapter 2 verses 3, I think it's verse 3, don't quote me on that, whether the word apostasia, right, which is translated in Bibles as apostasy or falling away, and people argue that, well, in older English translations, like all the original English translations translated that as departure, so really it refers to the rapture and not this like religious falling away. Well, apostasia in simple ordinal gematria is 101. So I mean that should settle the question right there. That actually it actually is a reference to the rapture. But in my opinion, stuff like that's like intentionally, it's intentionally left in this sort of ambiguous state for God's purposes. He did it intentionally. So he wants people who are willing to dig deep and who are willing to follow the truth to come to answer A, and then other people who maybe fail to do that will come to answer B. So they'll believe and accept the definition of that it means a religious falling away, and that will be true in a certain sense, and so they can interpret it that way. But the deepest understanding and the truest understanding is that it refers to the rapture. It actually should be translated as departure, meaning the departure of God's people off the earth. Anyway, just as a side note there. Let's see. About that 134 number, I did a little digging, and so the date of Shavat 26, can also be written as, like all dates can be written backwards, like 26 of the 11th month. And I looked at Strong's Hebrew 2611, and it's a single use word, which are always very suspicious. And that word is only used in, okay, I don't know why I have H there, but it should be G, because there is no Hebrew in the New Testament, because the only use of that word is actually in Luke 10:34, which is 134. So that's very suspicious, and that's another connection, if you want to accept that as a connection, between the date of Shavat 26 and 134. It's corresponding official Jewish date. And for fans of my channel, longtime fans who know I've been on this quest to understand the meaning of the number 118 or 811, which has been tormenting me for half a year now, the date of 11/26 can partially reduce to 118, because 2 plus 6 is 8. Or vice versa, if it's 2611, it'll be 811. All right, so let's see here. So I think everything has been leading up to this date here, and I think the reason that trees and Feast of Trees is so heavily telegraphed by all the numbers and the Enochian calendar and this diagram itself is because Feast of Trees is the last named event or feast day or whatever prior to the rapture. So it's natural, looking at it from that perspective, that the Feast of Trees would be constantly projected numerically. It's just as if if the rapture were scheduled to occur 5 days after Shavuot, all the stuff that you would find if you started digging into the connections would probably talk about Shavuot. It's the same thing here, in my opinion. So another thing is that date is 2 days after Shavat 24. Now, Shavat 24 is mentioned in the book of Zechariah, and a lot of people have talked about it. It's in chapter 1, verse 11. I think it's 11. Okay, so it's basically verses 7 through 11. And he's talking about the 24th day of the 11th month. It is the month of Shavat. And that's where he's, let's see, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah. Okay, and then it goes into eventually talking about how he sees horses between these myrtle trees, and they're red and white. I don't know what bay means. I think it's speckled in other translations. But you have which is an obvious reference to the red and white horses, which are the first two seals of Revelation. And then in verse 11, it says that we've walked up and down the land, and lo, all the land is sitting still and at rest. Okay, so what does that tell you? That tells you that on Shavat 24, it's not yet, war hasn't started yet. Like the tribulation hasn't started yet, because the world is at rest. And that's just perfect, because if that scene is supposed to be like this, I mean, it's obviously implied here that is just before it's about to, stuff's about to happen. So that aligns perfectly, because if that's Shavat 24, that would be March 12th, right? 2 days before Shavat 26. And if stuff's about to happen right after that, it makes sense that the rapture would be on or around March 14th, right? It's just about 26. And let's see, what else happens on Shavat 20, well, I should say on March 14th, or excuse me, March 12th, is something that I mentioned in one of my community posts. Let's see if I still have the picture here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. So you've got this great lineup of the 7 ancient luminaries. Okay, now it happens to look uncannily like a menorah, or at least resemble a menorah, or give off that effect. Now other channels have mentioned how it actually is 9 or 10 different planets or whatever, but which is true, and you can look at it that way for sure. But the reason I only mention these is because these quote unquote luminaries, Mars, Venus, Saturn, Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Jupiter, are the only ones that were known to the ancients. Okay, so I only include these. Now these are going to be lined up in this way that looks like a menorah, with the sun, S-U-N, S-O-N, sun in the middle, right? On March 12th. Okay, so 2 days prior. So on that same day of Shavat 24, the same date that's mentioned in Zechariah chapter 1. And Brother G44 pointed out to me in Revelation 4, chapter 4, verse 5. Okay, so this is when this is a scene in the throne room, and it's talking about the 24 elders and how, let's see, there are 7 lamps of fire that are burning before the throne. Okay, and this scene is right before the Lamb opens the seals. So this is also perfectly aligned with what I just talked about in Zechariah chapter 1, where Shavat 24 seems to be right before the tribulation, like it's just about to happen. And then here we have this 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which this seems to be symbolic of. And that, the 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne in the throne room, seen right before the seals are opened. So yeah, that's also a nice parallel. I think this is just this. I mean, these aren't exactly those lamps, but I think it's just symbolic of it, because those lamps are burning before the throne, where the as Brother G44 pointed out, the 24 elders are already there, which is the church. So, but I think it's definitely symbolic of it. So yeah, to sum up, we've got this celestial symbolism of the throne room scene in Revelation chapter 4, just prior to the Lamb opening the seals, that just happens to occur on the date of Shavat 24, which is the same date mentioned in Zechariah chapter 1, where the red and white horses are about to ride. I think this is really, really clear, guys. And so, assuming our rapture date prediction here of March 14th is correct, that timing would be perfect. I mean, it's pretty much just after that March 12th date, you know. So another thing that happens on March 14th is that the sun will be at 354 degrees of ecliptic longitude. Now, if you remember ecliptic longitude, that was one of the things involved with looking at the 276 sign. So the ecliptic is the imaginary line that goes around the Earth that the sun, moon, and planets move from right to left along. And when the sun was at 276 degrees back on December 27th going into the 28th, that was how we knew that one of the main reasons that we knew that the 276 sign was manifesting. So that's what the ecliptic is. And so the longitude is just, it's a circle, a big circle going around us. So that's got degrees, and it's got 360 degrees. So it was at 276 degrees at that time. And on March 14th, it'll be at 354 degrees. Now, if you might know this already, or you might know it from following my videos, but 354 is a massively important rapture-related number. It is Strong's... yeah, here we go. Wow, it's right there. Strong's 354 is, in Hebrew, is stag or deer, which is the reference to Jesus coming for his bride. It occurs in a lot of places, but it occurs in Song of Songs, chapter 2. A leaping stag coming on the mountains, and so on. And then Strong's Greek 354 is, I think it might, yeah, analempsis, which means a taking up. That could not be much clearer than that, what that refers to. And 354 also is representative of the moon, because there are 354 days in a lunar year, and the moon, as you know, is sort of symbolic of the body of Christ. The Christ is the sun, and we are the moon, reflecting the sun's glory. And let's see what else. 354 is also, we're actually also right now in the 354th Shemitah since the Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy began back in 457 BC. So 354 is just a number you'll see all the time. It's it's heavily representative of the rapture. It's totally baked into all the other rapture numbers. Like when you do basic arithmetic on the other rapture numbers, 354 is just woven into all of it, like into the fabric of all of it. So the fact that on March 14th the sun will be at 354 degrees of ecliptic longitude is massive. Okay, so now let me show you how the book of Acts, and also specifically Acts 27 and 28, are pointing directly to Shabbat 26. Okay, so I've said it 1,000 times, but I'll say it again. The book of Acts representative number is 119. There are many, many ways to show that. One of the ways I've showed it in the past is the fact that the book of Acts has 1,007 verses, and 1,007 is equal to 888, which is Jesus, plus 119. Now, what if we take that 119 and then add it back to 1,007? Excuse me. Plus 117. Oops, 119, excuse me. Happens to equal 1126 for Shabbat 26. That is not just a minor connection. That is a huge, huge, huge connection, and it even gets better. So if we then look at the 126th, let me move this over a little bit here. 126th composite number happens to be 1344, which is the number of verses in Acts 27 and 28. Acts 27 has 44 verses, and Acts 28 has 31 verses, which is 44, 31, so obviously it's reversed there. That is another very, very compelling connection between the number 1126 and the book of Acts and Acts 27:28. And while we're looking at numbers, in my last few community posts, I've been looking at numbers having to do with the Feast of Trees or trees in general, or almonds or almond trees or watching. There seems to be this set of numbers that all are related and pointing to that. And I don't want to get into it now because it would make this video way too long, but just check out my last 2 or 3 community posts and I sort of dig into that a little bit. But the tree, I'll just call them tree numbers. And they are 1337, 137, 337, 211 or 112, and 214, as we recently found. And this complex of conceptually related numbers also seems to point to Shabbat 26. So for instance, if you take 1337, subtract 211, you get Shabbat 26. If you take 789, which if you remember from last videos is referring to this Jewish year because it's 5 plus 7, 8, 4. That's the official Jewish year. Plus 337, you get Shabbat 26. If you take Shabbat 26 and add to it 214, which is another tree number, also refers to the 14th chapter of Exodus, which is the chapter where they crossed the Red Sea, you get 1340, which is, if you drop the 0, the 134, which we saw earlier, which is Adar to 4th day, which is the official Jewish date on Shabbat 26, on March 14th. It's also going to be the week, the 337th week since the 2017 Revelation 12 sign. So on March 14th, it'll be the 337th week since that sign. So those are just a few examples. Now I want to take a look at what I'm calling calendar magic here. And what I mean by that are these really amazing alignments, I guess you'll call them, that seem to pop up when you look at the dates that we plotted on the symmetrical diagram, like, for instance, Shabbat 26. So, for example, try to wrap your head around this. Shabbat 26, March 14th, is the 329th Enochian day of the year, with 292 Gregorian days remaining in the year. So, right, so you got your 329 and your 292. And it's 37 days after the 37th Gregorian day of the year, and that 37th Gregorian day of the year happens to be the 292nd Enochian day of the year, with 329 Gregorian days remaining in the year. So again, you've got the symmetry. You've got the 292 and the 329 popping up. It's just really amazing. I find stuff like this all the time, and I don't know how to explain it, but I'll just describe that for you, and you guys can try to process that. Okay, so this next one's a little tricky to explain. So currently, Shabbat 26, March 14th, has the mirror date of November 9th, 119. And that mirror date is based on a pivot date of this Kislev 24, January 11th. Okay, so we explained all that. But if you change the pivot date to the Gregorian New Year, then that means the mirror date of November 9th would change. So November 9th is 52 days away from the Gregorian New Year. That means its mirror date would be the 52nd day of 2024. And then that would be 221. So under that scheme, using the Gregorian New Year as the pivot point, then November 9th would have its mirror date. Its mirror date would be a day with 314 days left in the year. So 314 days left in 2024, which is just like the current pivot date of March 14th. So some kind of spookiness going on with these calendar alignments. This is just another example of stuff I find. Another very cool thing that I noticed while I was sitting here looking at this diagram is that one event which is notably absent from this symmetrical diagram is the child asteroid Revelation 12 sign. It's actually, it would be off to the left side of the screen here because it took place on September 19th. It's not part of the 178-day symmetrical structure here. But that's September 19th, and then remember that sign symbolized the rapture of the church. So that was 25 days. September 19th was 25 days prior to the wedding ring solar eclipse on October 14th. And this date we're looking at here, March 14th, is also exactly 25 days prior to the next solar eclipse, which would be the second Great American Eclipse. So it's almost like that first span there of the 25 days from symbolic rapture sign to wedding ring eclipse was a symbolic foreshadowing of the actual rapture, which would also likewise occur 25 days prior to a solar eclipse. Wouldn't that be something? I thought that was very cool. And the last thing I wanted to talk about real fast was about pi. Now, that's sort of been the elephant in the room the whole time here, because obviously a date of 314 reflects the value of pi, 3.14. And I don't know how many of you know this, but an approximation of pi is 22 divided by 7. Because it equals pi, not exactly, but pretty close. And I think that's also why I think it's July 22nd is like International Pi Day or something like that, for that reason, right? Because of that ratio, 22 divided by 7. And yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I have a couple of little things that I found about that. So in the current calendar, so this is another one of these like calendar alignments or calendar magic. November 10th Gregorian was Tishri 22 on our Enochian calendar. Okay? And then February 27th Gregorian, so it's basically just 22/7, the reverse of 722, happens to equal Shavat 10 Enochian. So you've got this symmetry here that seems to be I don't know, tuned to or aligned to 22/7, because or 722, because it doesn't happen with other dates. You can't get this symmetrical phenomenon if you took like 723 and 327, for instance, right? You're not going to get this phenomenon. It's only happening with these dates of which have the signature of 722 or 227, which, as we've seen, is represents pi. So that could that also be a hint baked into the calendar dynamics, pointing to pi, or pi day, as it were, right? 314, March 14th. Another thing I noticed was that so 22 divided by 7, well, I'll just put it up here, is pi, as we've seen. 7 divided by 22 produces a very curious number, 0.318, which, if you've been watching my videos for any length of time, you'll know that number 318 keeps popping up over and over again in all of the work and all the numerics and the diagrams and the calendars. For instance, 3 months and 18 days is the delta between the Gregorian and Enochian calendars this year. 3 months and 18 days are 110 days. The Axe ship voyage duration was 3 months and 18 days Gregorian. So from the first south wind, where they left Fair Havens, to the second south wind, which took them through the Strait of Messina, that was exactly 3 months and 18 days. the Feast of Trees here on March 3rd. That was the 318th day of the year. And as I mentioned earlier, the Feast of Trees is significant in that it seems to be the feast day that occurs just prior to the rapture. And the 318th prime number is 2111, which points to John 21:11, which mentions the catch of 153 fish. And if you reverse that 2111, you get the 1112, which points to Genesis, first book, chapter 1, verse 12, which is the verse in the creation account in which trees are created. Another pointer to the Feast of Trees. So 318, that number seems to be connecting so many dots. Everything pops up in the diagram seems to have some sort of relation to that number. The Enochian calendar is related to it. The Axe ship voyage has a connection to it. Feast of Trees is connected to it. And now it's connected to pi. It seems that if you just reverse this pi approximation operation, instead of getting pi, you get 318. So there's that connection too. So yeah, that's where we are now. March 14th is looking to be an extremely high watch date. Personally, I am overwhelmed by the amount of information that I'm finding that seems to point to that date. So, but I guess, yeah, we'll see. You know, only God knows. But keep looking up because it looks like our departure is near. So thank you for watching to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it blessed you. If you have any comments or questions, please drop them down in the comment section. And yeah, thanks for watching. God bless.